Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. This week's episode, we're going to discuss warm-ups. So, let's kick it. Warm-ups. We'll start with the importance of warm-ups, but I know, as I'm sure many of our listeners on top of us, sometimes you get into the gym and you just kind of skip the warm-up, or sometimes you spend your whole workout in the warm-up. So today we're going to try to explain the importance of warm-ups, how to optimize your warm-ups, and everything in between. So Porrick, if you want to get us started with the importance of warm-ups.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a funny one because you say like sometimes we end up in the gym and the warm-up never happens and you just are straight into the first exercise of the day. And the real thing is, on an individual day's basis, that doesn't really matter. That's the hard part, because for performance for that day, unless you have limitations that you're trying to work around and you have to address that specifically. If you have no real limitations, you're coming in and you're just performing a lift that you have more than adequate range to get into, there's nothing wrong with just going into a specific warm-up and going. But the issue is you're leaving long-term potential on the table by not addressing different modalities within the warm-up that could lead to better results 6, 12, 18 weeks down the line. So the problem is you can definitely get just as good a training session, just as good a training response from that training session without doing the warm-up or the general part of the warm-up, just a specific warm set or two. But it's the long-term attributes that you're leaving on the table. And that there's where it's sometimes a harder sell for people, because they're like, oh, I can get exactly what I want right now, or I can do something that's a little bit boring, a little bit tedious for 5 to 10 minutes for long-term potential.
I know recently I was talking to Steph about it because, and I know this will be for a lot of people view warm-ups as, well, if I'm not spending the 10, 15 minutes doing my general warm-up, I get injured. And this has been proven that that is not true.
Not at all. There's been multiple studies over the years proving that a warm-up does not necessarily decrease the incidence of injury. So anyone who thinks that, I need to warm up so I don't get injured, it's not necessarily.
I would just like to further clarify that in weight training.
In weight training.
High velocity things like sprinting and stuff, that's not the same. But in weight training, yes. There's very little correlation between completing a warm-up and not getting injured. It's not really a thing.
But I think it's also, it goes back to some people, I know Alex, you'll speak to this, it's also just you'll feel better, like just almost like you'll feel more
you just
ready
feel
for
more
your
ready.
Session.
You're feeling, well, especially kind of like what you said, if you have a lot of like mobility type of issues, and that's the time that you kind of loosen up, you get the muscles ready to go. And I can feel a big difference between when I do a warm-up and then when I don't. But I still do a specific warm-up, of course, but it does make a difference. But sometimes if I'm short for time, I can just jump in and do it, because I have put in the work of consistently doing like a general warm-up before I start training. So,
I mean, warm-ups, like it's funny, like for people like me and Alex have been in this game for a long time. Like we've seen an evolution of warm-ups over the years. And like when I first started out lifting, so we're talking about late 80s, warm-ups were 15 minutes of bike. You know, you get to the gym, you do 15 minutes of bike to warm up. And then you would go right into the session. But then, of course, me being an early follower of Charles Poliquin, he was so anti-cardio that, of course, I skipped that 15-minute cardio. I thought it was pointless. And I knew about the importance of the specific warm-up, but, man, I'll be honest with you, I did one set maybe.
I can't imagine. Now, I did the same thing. I just jumped into the first.
Yeah, like I would go right into it, and I mean, and I'm approved at the injury prevention because I never really gotten injured.
Yeah, in the gym,
But
yeah.
But what's funny though is I quickly realized that my best set was always like my third set.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But you know,
So like one of the big things is, so while sitting for a bike for 15 minutes seems so counterproductive to going into a weight training session, most of the benefits from the warm up outside of working on specific mobility or pretty much mobility things is the raise in body temperature, core muscular temperature.
Yeah.
And so like it's a very easy way for people, like if you have clients coming in and they are coming in slightly early, that'd be like just any form of cardio for 5-10 minutes, really low intensity, just to raise the core body temperature is going to have them in a better position to have better muscular contractions, more forceful output from the very start of the session. So like while it was a very boring warm up in the 80s and while we could do better, it's still a very plausible way to warm up for a strength training session.
Even my first personal trainer I ever worked with, it was I would get to the gym and my warm up, I was told to go on like a low incline treadmill, and I did 20 minutes of treadmill before my training session.
yeah.
How about the sauna? Can we sit in the sauna for that?
Well, there
I would
is
be a
studies.
sweaty
Well,
mess if I went for a
But like
sauna.
10 minutes? You know,
no,
just to
there's
get
studies that compare active versus passive warm-ups, and active warm-ups always outperform the passive warm-up. So passive warm-up was involve anything like sauna, heated blankets, anything like that there. They still helped, but they're not nearly as effective as an active warm-up where you're involving your central nervous system and the muscular contractions within the whole process.
Yeah. But then like going back to the evolution of warm up. So then what was interesting is then later on, I would say mostly like early to mid 2000, then it was the dynamic warm up.
Yep.
Like started rolling in, which this was an improvement of the just like very linear, like bike type of warm up. But the problem is for a while there, like those dynamic warm up ended up being so long and so exhaustive that you could almost argue that it became counterproductive to the strength session because you built a lot of cumulative fatigue. There were even some instances where you had lactate accumulation.
Yep.
So this becomes a little counterproductive.
And then it even becomes counterproductive on a time frame standpoint because most people can only dedicate so much time to their training. So if you're spending 30 minutes of that time on the warm-up, that time allotment could be much more efficient and much more beneficial spent in the resistance training. And then again, the research brings it back to you get most of your benefits of the warm-up from 3 to 10 minutes. Like like 90% of the benefits have already occurred there. You've already risen the core temperature, the muscular temperature. You're now in a position that you're ready to go and express force in more multi-joint compound movements.
Yeah, I think an important part of those 3 to 10 minutes will be the intent behind those 3 to 10 minutes. Because again, I know for myself, sometimes I go in, I choose to do a warm-up, the general warm-up, but I'm kind of a little bit lazy about it. So I'm not even really optimizing the time I'm dedicating to it. But now with the new warm-ups that we have, when you put them together, now we have like upper, lower, full body power. It's just like, okay, just go in, spend the 10 minutes to get it done, and then you're ready to go into the specific.
And realistically, ours don't even take 10 minutes. They take 10 minutes if we add in additional static stretching. But if we're just doing the actual dynamic warm-up, like I would think 6 minutes probably gets it done.
Yeah, 6 minutes. And but then like the cool thing about those dynamic warm-ups is now you get the rise in body temperature that's important for, joint fluidity, for lack of a better term. But then instead of just being on the bike, now we're using a combination of movements that makes the trainee move in positions that they're not used to.
Yeah.
So you're increasing body temperature, but you're grooving motor patterns in a way. So that dynamic mobility kind of also revs up the central nervous system. So it's a lot of little things that will help prepare you for the strength training. Again, not necessarily in the injury prevention perspective, but on up to a certain point on a performance aspect.
Do you think you guys, speaking in terms of being like personal trainers, how would you best advise coaches to handle this with their clients? Because we know most clients can't get to the gym early necessarily. So how do you say they should take their clients through warm-ups?
I mean, I would say that I remember back for me, like a lot of clients still got there a little bit early. Like they can get there like 5-10 minutes early. And obviously the first few times I would definitely take them through the warm-up to make sure that they're doing it correctly. But then eventually they should be able to do it on their own. Like even if it is just like 5 minutes, like you have to let them get that warm-up in so that you can really maximize like your weight training session. But
one thing I think people always overlook is when we start with clients, it's not like you're going to start with them with a ton of volume of work. You have to gauge their recovery. So say we're programming the program session only is going to take 40 to 45 minutes. That's got time allotment built into that their training session for that warm up. And then as we then gauge their recoverability and say, oh, we can push this a little further and fill in that time frame more with resistance training, they're at the point then that you've already taught them the warm up, you've already taught them the signs to look out for, to figure out what they need to work on specifically, and then they can do it on their own at that stage.
And the truth, they'll feel better with doing it, so they'll want to do it.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to just what you were saying, Steph, with different movement patterns in earlier pork, when you were saying you're looking to affect potentially 6-12 weeks, like further down the line, because you see a lot of people not be able to move well anymore. So even like bending over to touch your toes, like with the walkouts, I forget what we call them.
Inchworm into world's greatest.
Those it's good to get people to do those movements because again, most people aren't that active nowadays. Exactly. So to get them moving in different ways before the sessions.
And they're coming in from work. They come in from driving 30 minutes. Like
we all seen other trainers go through this during the courses, and they're not good.
No, but I think even for them, it's always interesting because I'm sure everyone that was just here, we take them through the warm-ups before the sessions now. They probably go back and they take themselves through the warm-ups and hopefully stick to it for longer because we should all be able to move in different ways.
I mean, and also gives you a lot of information, right? Like if you're doing that world's greatest, like, and you see some people do it, sometimes you're like, okay, like there's something going on there that might potentially affect like technique on something like a squat, for example, that you're like, okay, well, I need to address mobility of like the hip, for example. So you have a clear cut view of what's going on.
I know we have plans on putting together YouTube videos, like long form YouTube videos of the warm-ups we have. So the upper, lower, full body and everything. But in terms of the selection of exercises for these warm-ups, just so people get somewhat of an idea of what we're talking about. I know we mentioned Inchworm to World Greatest, but it's more just, what would you say, like overall movement?
Yeah, so it's addressing the key joints that are going to be trained that day, but then starting from very, very simplistic, nearly single joint outlook towards more dynamic, more compound, for lack of a better word, mobility driven movements towards the end of the warm up. And it's one of those that obviously like the exercise selection's all there for a very specific reason and it all makes sense in totality, but doesn't mean we couldn't swap in and out other exercises if someone prefers a different version to achieve the same goal. So like ours are very much built off on the things we like to use to address that specific goal, but it doesn't mean there isn't other things that can do just as good a job. But yeah, the whole thing is we're going to address, so like for the lower body, we're going to address the hip, knee, ankle. Hip definitely gets probably the most attention, but everything does get a significant amount of attention. Then upper body, it's the shoulder girdle and thoracic extension, rotation, So it's just like one of those, what is best going to prepare you for the upcoming demands of the training session. And then there will be some overlap of the use of the same exercises that have really key mobility benefits long term for people in both. So like things like the scorpion, like people don't spend enough time like getting their leg over to the other side of their body to try and stretch those different lines of pull, and we can say fascial lines and fascial swings if people want to be fancy about it. But realistically, it's just one of those that we're trying to maximize the most beneficial exercises to try and put you in the best positions possible to improve mobility and mobility long term, and then your ability to perform in the session short term.
Yeah, and it's cool too, because after that 6-7 minutes, so now like typically like you're starting to break a sweat, right? Mm-hmm. So now you know that body temperature is up. You've addressed the joints and movement, so you feel a little looser, especially if you've been sitting for a while right before. So at that point, you feel ready to go to the more specific part of the warm-up, which is the specific warm-up.
But I think we should talk about also just the mental aspect of doing the general warm-up to get someone like really like mentally ready in the game. Like it's, instead of like, you know, forget all your stresses of the day, whatever happened before. I feel like that's a big part of it too, just to start that routine.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
No, it helps, because all I can think of every time I start the warm-up is when it ends. So it keeps my focus very targeted.
One thing, I know we'll move on to the specific because I know we briefly touched on it, but our general warm-up doesn't necessarily include static stretching, but we use static stretching when we see that someone may need a little bit more time in a specific stretch.
Yeah, or it helps them feel better in certain movement patterns. So like some people, while they may, like if you tested their like hip internal rotation, it might look fine, but if they stretch their hip internal rotation, their squatting pattern feels better. Okay, cool. We'll add in a bit of static stretching. Yeah. And then all the research for, I'm guessing like the last 20 years, I want to say, has sort of debunked the idea of static stretching pre-workout really downregulates performance. More so because it's so easy to negate the issues that come about through static stretching. All you need to do is add in dynamic movements, which we're going to do with the rest of the general warm-up, and then again with the specific warm-up. So it's all those potential downfalls are going to be negated really, really, really easily.
Yeah. So I know everything we're discussing is more around the strength training session, so preparing for the actual demands of the training session. But outside of that, when you have static stretching, it may be something you assign to someone completely outside of the training session, like if there is an issue.
Yeah, well, if you really need to change people's tissue, it takes a lot of dedicated time and frequency. So yes, if they really need to improve certain mobility things or flexibility things, whatever way you want to describe it, they're going to need more than their twice a week on their lower body sessions for 2 minutes. They're going to need that at a higher frequency, higher durations, etc., etc.
Because that static stretching included in the warm-up will be good enough to create momentary increases in ranges of motion to serve the purpose of the strength training session, but it's not enough volume of work to actually change mobility. And
then we don't want to do anything that's truly high intensity enough in the static stretching world, so the likes of Pails and rails before the training session, because it's so demanding and it somewhat creates a bit of instability in those joints that if you're going to then go and load, can be a little bit daunting.
Yeah, that's why like as a warm-up, so I'll just give you a very specific example, but so let's say you're doing your warm-up and your first exercise, you have like weak scap retractors, and your first exercise is a trap 3 raise, and you lack shoulder flexion. Well, then as part of the specific warm-up, you could add PNF for shoulder flexion to gain momentary access to more range of motion that you'll strengthen with the exercise. But it's very short-lived. It's momentary. It has a very specific purpose. But the advantage of PNF as opposed to Pails and rails in this context is it's way less intense. We're talking about like input of like less than 30%, like 20% for the most part. So it's not as draining as if you were to do Pails and rails at 70 plus of max input.
And it's very quick too.
It doesn't need to be preceded with a 2 minute long static stretch. So there's a lot of benefits there for just a very specific input just to get the most out of that next movement pattern. But it's not saying that's us addressing muscle tissue that is going to maintain that ability long term.
And then for those of you listening, correct me if I'm wrong, Pails and rails is something from FRC, like functional range conditioning, because we do have people now that still aren't aware of FRC, so I just want to clarify that. But then, so there's Pails and rails, but then you can use cars in the general warm-up, which is again from FRC. So that's more of what we use within
cars
it.
Is very, I mean, in simple terms, it's like circles. You're really just trying to gain, you're just trying to get the maximum range that you currently have. You're not trying to gain more range. You're just kind of opening up the joint, moving the joint, activating it, and you're still like creating like irradiation. So it's still like you're still putting intent into it. You're not just like flailing your arms around, but it's very different than Pails and rails, which is like a workout in itself.
But cars in the context of a warm up though shouldn't be intense. We're talking about cars, what they call cars level 1 or level 2, like where you are irradiating, but you're not exerting a ton. Like you're really just, it's mostly about going through and accessing your current range of motion around a joint in a circular fashion. So we're talking about the hip joint and the shoulder joint. And this is basically a cool tool to give your brain information about, quote unquote, the health of that joint at this point in time. And to make sure that you have a healthy joint to access everything you need to access. But don't think of, because sometimes you see them do cars where they're squeezing something, holding on to a hard ball, and they're squeezing really hard, and they're doing their cars with a lot of intent. This is to expand range of motion. That's not what you should do as a warm-up. It's a little less intense. They usually do that
after the Pails and rails, like the more intense type of cars.
Controlled articular rotations.
Yes, and Pails is progressive angular isometric loading, and rails is regressive angular isometric loading.
And we're not saying that these don't have a time and a place, but we just find they're better suited to their own training session instead of within the context of resistance training. Because it takes some of the
demands from the training.
I mean, we've like Alex and I did IFRC in 2017 or 18. I think it was 18. And we tried many different ways to integrate Pails and rails to the strength training session, but it's too wiping, and then it kind of almost leads to injuries.
Well, we had a client in Huntington Beach that went to an FRC, like as a client, not the certification, a kin stretch class, and he pulled his hamstring in it, just doing it. So, you do have to be careful what you're selecting to do prior to the session for sure. Okay, so now we've discussed the general warm-up, and now, Steph, we can go into a warm-up that you actually enjoy doing, the specific warm-up.
Does he enjoy it, or does he do I don't know if enjoy is the right word.
Let's just say that I'm known to be fast with warming up.
You're just known to be fast.
So I mean, so the general warm-up, we needed to, groove the groove movement and raise body temperature, but once that's happening, what's really more important becomes the specific warm-up. So for example, if you're doing a lower body session and your A exercise is a back squat, you now want to warm up specifically for the back squat. So you would squat, and at this point in time, what the brain needs to learn is what range of motion are we going to get into what velocity are we going to train at, and about what load are we going to do that movement with. So you need to that specific warm-up needs to be a squat in the same range and the exact same tempo that you will be doing for your exercise. And ideally, you would want to start with about 50% of the weight that you're going to use for your first set. And then you do 6 reps. Like you want to do enough rep to create repetitions, but you don't want to, like back in the days, like warm-ups were like 12, 15 reps. But the problem is eventually, as you keep increasing the load, you start, fatiguing and developing lactate into muscle, and that's actually affecting your performance. So you want just enough reps to tell the nervous system what's going on, but not so much so you're creating fatigue. So typically we like 6 reps at 50%. And then we do another set where we'll use like 70% of the load of the first set, and we'll do like 4 reps. Then we bump it up to about 90%. Then we do like 2 reps. And then usually most people are ready to go. Now, if you're stronger or you're doing really, really low reps, then you might want to add 1 or 2 more singles where you go then to 95, then to your 100, but just for 1 rep, just to make sure you're really preparing the brain for what's coming.
Yeah, so Verkhoshansky in Supertrain describes this specific warm-up as leaving traces. And this is the phrase that always really resonates with me to its importance. So you're just leaving traces in the nervous system to what it is expected to do in the upcoming session. So it's going to be easier for that nervous system to tap into the right motor units and create the right velocities and the right forces for the upcoming demand. So it's the way I always think of someone like running their finger through sand, they're just leaving a trace of what's the upcoming thing to do. That's how I picture the specific warm-up affecting your outcome for the upcoming training session.
Yeah, and then just so we're clear, once you've done your specific warm-up prior to your A series exercises, so let's say you're doing upper and it's overhead and chin, you warm up overhead and chin. But once that's done, that's it. Okay, you don't need, like if the workout is properly designed, you don't need to then do another specific warm-up before your B series, before your C series, and on and on. Unless there's always exception, of course, like if you're doing a snatch grip deadlift, a 4-inch deficit as your B series after front squat, which is brutal to do, you might need to do a few warm-up sets prior to that B exercise, but this is very...
Well, and most likely if you have that exercise in your B series, you're probably more advanced, you're probably stronger, you probably require more at that point.
Yeah. But these are like rare situations.
I think a good rule to base that off is if your B series requires significantly more range of motion or significantly more load, you probably need a few warm sets. Because another example, like the other extreme could be it's a rack pull from above knee.
Yeah.
So while it's a very short range of motion compared to the front squat you just did, it's going to be so much significantly heavier. You're probably still going to need a few warm sets. So if it's going to be a massive change in load or a massive change in range of motion, then it's probably worth doing a couple warm-up sets.
And then before you ask your question, side note with this, I know it has nothing to do with warm-ups, but I think it's a good situation to throw that in. And then if you're doing rack pull from above the knee and you're using like 600 plus pounds and all that kind of stuff, you should also step load, which goes opposite of what we recommend with your B series exercise. But this is it's
kind of like the warm up basically, but it's integrated into your...
Well, no, because you probably, if you're starting, you're not going to start with 600 pounds and step load to 660. You're still going to do a couple sets to get there.
I'm not talking about like a bodybuilder step load where it's like 1 plate, 2 plates, 3 plates, 4 plates. No.
I just shared that again yesterday in our stories.
So like you do your warm up, but then you step load. I think because it's just so demanding. It loses. It's like exercises like this are a little different than your typical like lying leg curl B series. You know what I mean?
So now, so you talked about the specific warm-up and we were talking about the A series. So obviously we're talking about the compound movements and getting prepared for those. But as we know, sometimes the session structures can move around a little bit depending on what you're currently working on. So how do you handle, say then they have something like remedials for their A series? What do you then do for your warm-ups once you're doing that and it's not a compound movement?
Yeah, I mean, so like, let's say you have shoulder remedials as part of your A series, and let's say you lack range of motion. This is a good time to do that PNF prior to. You're not going to really need much specific warm up. They're single joint, they're low load potential, so I wouldn't really worry about that. But then, if you're moving on to then like dips or like one of those big primary as your B exercise, then you might want to warm up, to do your specific warm up there, because you'll need it for the demands of that movement.
Yeah, like the extent you'd really need of a specific warm up for the remedials would be just a couple reps to gauge range of motion, so the trainee knows what they're expected to perform in the upcoming. But it's such a minimal thing; it barely could be called a warm up.
I think it depends. Like I know with your dad, like he doesn't need a warm up for the A series, which is a lot of the remedial stuff, but he still does. Like just even half the weight that he would use, or even just going through the range of motion without any weight, is enough to like just older people tend to forget what they're doing.
72.
Anyway. Yeah, but there's a lot of those clients, and it's like it's a brand new exercise every time they do it, but they've been doing it for 6 weeks. Like you still need to get them to do.
I was going to bring that up because I know with my dad you do a warm up with him, but my dad's also fucking 30 minutes early every time he gets here. So you spend a lot of time working on his feet. And I do find that that's something that a lot of people can most likely benefit from. So why did you choose to do that with him?
I mean, he has a few issues with his like ankles and feet and stuff, but a lot of people, I mean, we wear shoes, right? So imagine if your hand was in a closed boot and you never moved it, like you would lose all sensibility. You wouldn't be able to control your fingers like we do. So a lot of people, it's the same thing with their feet. They just don't move they don't know how to move their toes, and then they wear shoes that are too like narrow and all that stuff. So just like activating the feet just really increases your proprioception with like all your lower body stuff, just being able to control it and just loosening it up too.
Yeah, and a lot of times you then make him not wear his shoes and some of the exercises to do it as well.
To really focus on like, I mean, we just develop a lot of bad habits, but a lot of people like tend to supinate their foot a lot, so they're not, and we talked about this in one podcast where like pressing the base of the big toe is really important in terms of like being able to grasp the floor with your foot so that you can really send like the right like central nervous system, like activate all those muscles that you need to activate when you're
it's one of those like voodoo people things. I know it's not, but in terms of like, I think about when you first started with my dad, you'd be like, move your toe.
And he was like,
and nothing would fucking move. But now he can individually control each toe. And he's the type that like is just always in a sneaker. He doesn't wear slippers. It's not socks at home. It's a fucking sneaker that he wears as a house shoe. So he's just constantly in a shoe. Yeah. So it makes a difference for people.
But even with my dad, like you whenever he's in town, like you have him like walk on
the rope.
Which like I think he really likes.
Yeah, it really just
because he also has like a
plantar fasciitis. Yeah, but it really does just wake up the bottom of the foot that's just been like numb for like hours that people just wear their shoes. So just doing that just really increases all that. There was this one thing. Do you remember? I think it was Ben who had brought it, and it was like these little prickly things that you walk. It hurts. We need to get one of those. That'll be good for your dad too.
Okay, back to, so we covered a little bit of the specific warm-up. Was there anything we needed to go into on the specific warm-up?
Well, there's other things, like other strategies you can use. So like Steph was saying, if you're stronger, you can do a couple singles closer to your starting working weight. But there's other things, like if you're using ascending rep scheme, so either ascending reps or ascending stage system, so going from 3, 3, 5, 5, 7, 7. sometimes it's really beneficial to over warm up and overshoot your starting load by like 5%, or 2 to 5% is normally good, just to really get that nervous system ready, because you're starting with your heaviest load of the day instead of slowly peaking. So like that, there's a huge thing that most people really, really benefit from, for especially in those phases.
Yeah. Then there's other strategies for, so let's say you're doing a power macro and you're getting ready for some explosive strength work or whatever it might be. It's also really good to warm up with overcoming ISOs. So let's say you're doing a mid-thigh pull, and then you ramp up the intent of the pull within the pins as a overcoming ISO, which will allow you to access motor units beyond your actual 1RM, which is really, really, really good as a potentiator for then increased power during the session. So it's just a cool, clever neural trick to get more out of your power output in the training session.
For power sessions, the warm-up nearly has to be looked at completely like separate to normal
like
resistance.
A CNS.
Yeah, and then everything has to be, it doesn't have to be, everything else will benefit from a slightly higher velocity version of the loaded or the dynamic stretching, because that is what the expression of velocity is going to be at the start of the training session. So you're going to have to prepare the body for that. The introduction of really extensive plyometrics. So you're warming up that, especially the ankle complex, because it's such a dominant feature in power-based sessions. So you have to somewhat take a step back and relook at how power warm-ups are done, because like we have the power-based warm-up for us it's the only one that's really different compared to the full body, the lower body, the upper body. The power is like its own thing. It's off the side.
Workout too.
Because the thing that's important for coaches to understand, and that I feel like a lot of people don't realize, but like modes of contractions are very specific in the motor units that they're tapping into. Yeah. And then, so there's 3 overarching muscle fiber types. But within those 3 overarching, there's a bunch of subdivisions. So it's not like it's a clear cut. There's 3 muscle fiber types, and that's it. So you have the type 1, which is the slow twitch. You have the type 2A, which are fast twitch. And then you have the type 2X, which are fast twitch, but even bigger and even more forceful contraction. And they're mostly used for high velocity contraction. But then you have 2X mixed with 2As, and then blah, blah, blah. So you have a bunch of different strains of muscle fibers. But the thing is, if you're going to do power work, the muscle fibers mostly recruited are 2X. So you need to have a warm-up that will activate the 2X, because the 2X are the fibers that needs to be ready for the task. So if all you do is heavy, slow work, well, it won't be 2X. It's going to be 2As. So that's why if you're doing heavy strength training, you want to match the velocity of the strength training session, which might be 30x0 tempo. So you're warming up with a 30x0 tempo with load, because that's what's represented in the session. But if you're doing a reactive strength workout where the velocities are super high and the load is your own body weight, your warm up has to reflect that. It has to be high velocities. It has to be a load that's going to be representative of what you're doing. So that's why you need that general, but you absolutely need the specific warm up. And they're both really important, but you could argue that the specific warm up on a performance perspective is actually the one that's the most important.
Yeah, it's like the general is emotionally important for a lot of people, but the specific warm up is really the one that it's like, don't mess around with it, do it properly for the training. The
general one's the one that you can be really long term looking with your prescriptions, and like to have that 6-month goal that all right, if I do this consistently for the next 6 months, I am going to have improved this facet. Whereas the specific is, all right, this is what we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck right now in this training session.
Yeah.
Like, because for the general warm up for a power based session is a really good place to really introduce those extensive plyometrics to set the base for more intensive plyometrics further down the line that you're really going to be able to maximize and actually have the tolerance level to be able to do. Because most people, if they try and introduce intensive plyometrics, they're either so deconditioned that they hurt themselves, or they're so deconditioned that they can't produce any level of force expression or velocity expression and not get anything out of them anyway. So it's...
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're good.
So would you say for like a power type of training where you're doing velocity and you're doing a specific warm-up, would you use like something like the output? So how would you warm them up? Because if it's body weight, then you can't obviously decrease their body weight. So you would still start at like a lower intensity and then build it up. But would at some point during the warm up, when they're like at their maximum type of thing, would you start to maybe track their velocity? And then once they start training, then you're like, all right, well, this is the velocity and the speed that we need you to maintain. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sort of. You somewhat can reduce their weight because you can use bands. So for intensive or extensive plyometrics, you can hold on to a band, so not to allow you to get higher in each repetition, but to actually reduce your body weight for each repetition. So like it could be a tactic you use when people want to use plyometrics for the older population. So they're not actually doing it with their full body weight. So it doesn't have to be a band. It could just be a supported,
like a reverse band. So they're
reverse band. So it's pulling them up.
Yeah.
But then it's hard for the specific warm up. Yes, we could use a tracking device, but it's not really going to tell us a lot outside of, are we getting closer to a specific load that we need to create the specific velocity that we want. But if we're basing our load selection off a percentage of 1RM, which is generally how we program for the things, it would be more of just a feedback that this is a good load, this is the too heavy, is too light, but it probably won't affect our decision making that much, because you're basing this off like the percentages we prescribe. If someone's like 0.5 or 0.05 meters per second off where we wanted them to be, or where you categorize them at, you're like, all right, within 2 sets they probably will be there anyway once they actually get used to the exercise. So it's not just as cut and dry as, oh, they're a little off, we need to lighten that or we need to increase it.
Because you have to be careful too, because so let's say you're doing squats, like light inertia squats for starting strength purposes. So now we know that for a squat with starting strength, we want like 1.3 meters per second or above. But it cannot be like, okay, well, we're warming up for starting strength, so then warm up set number 1, let's shoot for 1.3.
No.
So you're not going to do this. So to me, it's almost it's not really needed to track it, because you're just ramping up your intensity from rep to rep and warm up set to warm up set, to the point where, okay, now I feel like my brain gets the picture of how much intent I need to put into it. Then you use the tracking device, and then you shoot for that 1.3 plus. But
so more on the last warm-ups that you would use a tracking device, so that you know.
If you want, but I don't think it's warranted.
I think the tracking device has its real potential of tracking from week to week and month to month to gauge progress, more so than telling you the warm-up's good.
Mm-hmm.
I know recently, going back to like in the continuum, someone asked about plyos with the elderly population. And our reply was somewhat of like including it in the warm up. But I do think it's a good way for you, like we always call them weekend warriors, or people that still want to feel active and do athletic things. It is a good time to get some of that type of movement incorporated into the sessions as well, even if their session doesn't necessarily call for power or output demands. It's still a smart way to integrate it safely.
Yeah, like if they only do their sporting activity once on the weekend, that means just doing the warm-up for that specific activity just before the activity isn't really going to prepare them for that activity. So even if their weight room sessions are purely resistance training, strength training bias, including some level of a power-based warm-up would be really beneficial for them, because it's just going to improve their overall preparedness going forward, so that by the time they get to that chosen activity at the weekend, that they're going to be in a better position.
It's just like the one thing I want to say though with like plyometrics with the elderly, like you
Kind of sounds funny.
Like,
Yeah.
not elderly. Elderly sounds horrible when you say that. Go ahead.
but you just have to be really, really, really careful, because like I'll give you guys like a example with pro athletes. So I'm sure you've all noticed how high the incidence of Achilles tears are in the NFL. Well, one thing I can assure you guys, for having trained over 100 NFL guys, is 99% of them have very, very poor ankle mobility.
Yeah.
Why? Because they tape their ankles all the time. Mm-hmm. They wear like some of them, they wear the high tops that are really, really tight. The foot can't move that much. They're doing this because of a false sense of protection. Then, culturally speaking, strength coaches in North America don't train the calf. So to them, it's useless. But the problem is, if you're not training the calf in a full range of motion, your ankle is taped all the time, you're in a boot all the time, guess what you will lose?
Yep.
Ankle mobility. Now, if you're doing plyos at really high velocities and high forces, and you're landing, and now you have passive range that's beyond your active range, but you have no strength in that passive range because you never access it because you don't train calves, guess what's going to happen?
Yeah.
So if you're training the elderly prior to even contemplating doing any type of plyo, I would make sure that you spend some time before.
Not even elderly, just
Yeah,
anyone.
just
Anyone, but
Yeah.
mostly the elderly, because their tissue is way more vulnerable. So you want to make sure that you spend time building ankle range of motion and building strength in that range of motion.
Yeah.
So like the seated calf raise progression of the MAP assessment course, for example, would be a good way to build some type of resiliency prior to.
Yeah, and then like just on that same point, you still need to build some resiliency in around the knee joint. So same thing, you're going to want to build like just normal split squat and step up progressions. Like, so there's a bit of resiliency there. You need to address the knee flexors. You need to address the hip joint. So like, it's like anyone, like if you're going to do this with elderly gen pop, you probably need to bring them through a GPP sort of thing to prepare them for it, because it's such beyond the demands of their everyday life.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, elderly could be a 65-year-old who still runs marathon.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, so, like, I'm like, we're putting whatever
Generalism.
Yeah, generalisms, because in my head they were 85 and walking with a cane. But
We're like,
jump off this box.
But yeah, like anything in training, you have to meet the client where they're at.
Yeah.
Prepare them for the upcoming demands. Introduce new demands very slowly.
Yeah.
Like it's
Like I'm picturing Clint Eastwood right now, like doing
That
plyos.
last movie we watched with him, running, that was not good.
He's old.
What was it? I forget what it
Well,
was
the one
called.
with the little rooster
Yeah,
thing.
that's all I can remember. Ain't the same. Just to wrap up the episode, I wanted to kind of just personally go through some warm-up things that we found most helpful for ourselves, because we all kind of spend different times on different things. Just randomly, one thing that always comes to the mind for me is more primarily dips and chin-ups, like because you're going right into your body weight, so you're generally at a higher load once you start doing it. For me, the dips, it was push-ups, but I really like the push-up where you showed me part a few years ago, where I don't know what to call it, like a depth
Yeah.
push-ups.
So pretty much
On
like
the parallettes.
yeah, parallels would be
stepping
the
or-
easiest way to do
yeah.
it, just so that you can get a little bit more range of motion.
Yeah,
So,
and I just like to sink into it more. It almost mimics getting into the bottom position of the dip. And then even for chin-ups, when I know that my reps are lower, so my weights, my load will be higher once I'm starting my actual chin-up set. It's like, for me personally, it's like scap retraction that I just like to get warmed up in specifically before then starting my actual. So I kind of incorporate those into my general warm-up for those lifts.
For those two, I like to do eccentrics too, like as a specific warm up to really like
Just
make
the
it-
eccentrics,
just the eccentric, and really get down, to, especially dips.
dip. Ooh.
Oh, just to get down into that position, because even no matter what I do for warm ups for dips, it's still like only the second or third set.
I mean, even when I was in my 20s, I still needed to do a few.
Yeah.
I need at least 2 sets of just one eccentric rep.
Yep, I agree.
What else do you spend additional time on?
I definitely have the most extended time that I spend on the ground before I get started. I do like to do like static type of stretching, especially for my hips, where I do the 90-90 in hip internal rotation, and I do some gentle PNF in those positions to just kind of get it going. Yeah, I mean, I use PNF a lot in my warm up, but I do static too.
yeah, I do a little bit of static for hips before lower body sessions. So mostly internal rotation. I do it in the frog stretch because you can do it bilaterally, so it saves a bit of the time. I then stretch hip flexors, stretch external rotators as well. But very briefly, just to ease myself into that range of motion. But that's somewhat now that I'm squatting flat foot and with a little bit more internal rotation demands. And except for that, since I designed the general warm-ups, they're maybe a little biased towards what I like in a warm-up. So I'm pretty good there. And then another thing I have done over the years, I'm not doing it currently because we're not doing conditioning currently, is sometimes during heavier phases, I pick very specific exercises during my conditioning days to address specific mobility things that would benefit the training week.
That was another question I was going to bring up, is strongman and conditioning sessions. So to optimally prepare for those, again, obviously a general warm up as well, but then are you doing, I guess it would depend on what exercises you have within it. Like if you're going to do a specific warm up.
Just do a round of the circuit with half intent type of thing.
Okay.
Like going through the motion and feeling the implement or.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so an example of using that as somewhat of a preparation for the upcoming sessions is, say, you're feeling tight through your hamstrings or your lower back, like the bear crawl, straight leg bear crawl variations, great to add in there. Or I used to, if I felt that my shoulder stability was an issue in upper body sessions, the sidewards traveling based or sideward traveling ape. And then, but really exaggerating your time off the ground and really making sure you're planting one hand and then transferring the other hand, so it's a slow. So are you taking some of the condition elements away? Maybe because you're not moving as fast as possible, but the long-term benefits are there. So it's just sort of using your other training sessions to address issues as well.
Steph, what about you?
Yeah. Yeah.
We did a video of your warm up. You come from outside, you drop your bag.
I mean, listen, I like the dynamic warm up and the specific warm up. I just need to get better at I mean, it's old habits, man. You're talking about a dude who for 30 years straight, I went from sitting in my office to set one of my bench press. One time I was in my office, walked around, Tony Soib was doing bench press with 315. I stepped in, popped 2 reps with 315, went back into my office.
Stroke your ego a little bit.
So that's what I'm used to, but I'm trying to get better.
Hey, if you were able to start doing cardio, I have faith in you that you can start.
No, I know.
Start doing
I just man, I fucking hate warming up.
as a gymnast, we spent a lot of time like warming up. Like we'd spend an hour like doing different, and they weren't all static. It was a lot of like dynamic stuff. And then when I stopped gymnastics, then I kind of just stopped stretching also. And I wonder what I did like the first, like in my 20s and early 30s. I don't remember what I did for a warm up.
Cardio.
You
probably.
didn't warm, yeah.
I didn't really warm up, right? But man, imagine if I did warm up. Anyway, so now,
yeah,
like,
but because I remember I've watched you train, like you didn't warm up, but like remember you would spend hours a week practicing your your fitness routine with like gymnastics elements and stuff. So it's not like your lack of warm up at that time obviously did not affect your flexibility.
Yeah, well, you still had the active you had the mobility.
Yeah, you were doing fucking backflip and like V sits, whatever the hell.
So I think it was my 30s I lost like the habit of like when I stopped doing that, and then I just started weight training. Anyways, but ever since
Charles was the same.
I know he was,
so
and then
like,
the chiropractor we worked with was also like, don't stretch and don't do this before you work out. So I stopped.
Like everybody in our surroundings back then were anti-stretching.
Yeah. But what was cool is like we had so many chiropractors, and I love getting treatment. And there were like 4 or 5 different ones. So every day I went to a different chiropractor, and he did ART on a different body part. So I was good for those like 7 years. I was awesome. But yeah, definitely need to do it now.
But one thing I just want to say though is, when you're dealing with like Gen Pop and like the older Gen Pop crowd, like we know that in order to build flexibility or even better mobility, it needs work and it needs time and it needs exposure. There's no way around it. But if you're doing a dynamic warm-up and you spend, let's say, 6 to 8 minutes doing the dynamic warm-up every time they train, although you might not build extreme mobility, they will still improve their ability to move.
Yeah.
And because that Gen Pop typically, outside of coming to you, they're not doing shit. So at least if you can have them move for 8 minutes, 2, 3, 4 times per week, it's something. Yeah. And if they do it all the time, eventually, like you're actually,
and they feel good when they do it.
They feel good, but you're actually going to start seeing like improvements.
They might not feel good when they first get, because they might be limited in it. So it's like you have to work through it, but they will get better and they will feel better.
And if you could, like a lot of Gen Pops don't react well to getting homework, but if the ones, some do, some love it. And then you can say, all right, on your days not here, I still want you to do the warm up. And that's all I'm asking of you. The people who get into that habit will probably keep that habit for years because they feel so much better because of it.
Yep.
And the movie Cry Macho.
Oh yeah, with Clint Eastwood. So Steph, I think what you need to end it with is do what I say, not what I do.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe. See you next week.